This episode is sponsored by StationWise, the first staffing software to be truly firefighter-proof. Now, you may be wondering why I have software as a sponsor when I focus usually on physical and mental health of the first responders, and I will tell you exactly why. For the first time, this is a staffing platform that also is able to integrate wellness information through call load tracking, exposures, and wearables integration. Now, of course, StationWise focuses on staffing and allows you to manage staffing, choose vacation picks, put in rules for leave and trades, and even deploying strike teams. But through the latest programming and AI automation, they have streamlined this process to free up battalion chiefs so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing on the operational side and the fireground. Now, StationWise is also able to monitor not only how many calls we've responded to in a shift, but the duration of the call, therefore the rest and recovery in between, thus monitoring the sleep deprivation that degrades our health and performance. It's accessible not only through the computer, but also on Apple and Android devices, meaning that you can access it not only within the station itself, but outside as well. Now, one of the most powerful features of StationWise, in my opinion, is the ability to run reports. Therefore, for example, be able to see just how much money is being used on overtime that could actually be front-loaded for proactive staffing, as well as setting alarms knowing when you are hitting overtime parameters. And another important feature is the integration of other programs and software for payroll, training, reports, etc. Now, StationWise is trusted by numerous agencies in California, Texas, and Idaho. And if you want to hear the full story from the founder, who he himself is a son of a firefighter, listen to episode 1163 with Marcus Edwards. And if you want to book a demo or learn more, go to stationwise.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week I have one of the most important conversations I would argue I've had on the show. Rick Mountcastle is a former U.S. attorney and was also the man who led the team to prosecute Purdue Pharma after their predatory actions with Oxycontin that led to today's opioid crisis. So in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his own journey into the world of law, prosecuting mobsters, the deliberate falsification of documents and information by Purdue that created the Oxycontin crisis, government corruption through the FDA, the dark side of nursing homes, his documentary No Country for Old People, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Rick Mountcastle. Enjoy. Well, Rick, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Dr. Todd Otten, for making this connection. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, kudos to Todd for hooking us up.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this morning?
I'm in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, right outside of Charleston. We've been here a little over 3 years, kind of the place that we retired to. Yeah, it's kind of retired, but then I unretired in April. So
well, congratulations.
Thanks.
Well, I would love to start at the very beginning of your timeline. Obviously, you're known for two very specific areas at the moment when it comes to what's being portrayed on the screen. But I'd love to just kind of learn the backstory as well. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Wow. Okay. So I was born in Tokyo, Japan. Um, my father was in the Air Force. My mother was a Japanese national. And so that's sort of the beginning. And then, of course, as an Air Force brat, we moved all over the place. I got two younger sisters. And we lived, all over the United States and in Europe. After my father left the Air Force, he went to work for the Army as a civilian, and we continued to move every 2 or 3 or 4 years, sometimes even more often. And my teenage years were spent in Italy and Germany at Army Department of Defense schools. And then upon graduation, I came back to the States, went to Marquette University, undergrad, and George Washington University Law. Had an ROTC scholarship for my undergrad, so I ended up going in the Army for 4 years after law school as a JAG. And, then I guess after that, after the 4 years, I did a couple of years at an agency, Department of Transportation sub-agency, and then went to the Department of Justice in 1986. So that's kind of a quick start to the first 30 years or so.
I lived in Osaka, Japan for 15 months as a stuntman, so totally different path than you took. One of the things, I forget, I think it's Hemingway talks about the enemy of prejudice is traveling, or I'm paraphrasing. But it's when you have traveled around the world and lived in different places, you start to see some of the differences in cultures and some of the solutions to some of the problems that different areas have. When you reflect back now to your early years all over the globe, what were some of the things that were maybe done better than other areas, and then maybe some of the ones that were more challenging as you were kind of jumping around from country to country?
Yeah, done better. That's a hard one because a lot of my time was spent in enclaves of, on bases and stuff. So there was that kind of insulation. But I think maybe one of the most memorable experiences is that we were in Guatemala for 4 months and seeing, and this would have been in the late 60s. I don't know that things have changed a great deal since then, but seeing the extreme poverty, that's kind of left an impression on me. Just at the time, maybe it's changed now. We were in Guatemala City, the capital. There was a couple of paved streets, but almost all of the streets were unpaved, and just people in extreme poverty, just trying to get by, kind of left an imprint in terms of what we have in the United States and how little we appreciate what we have. And then kind of put a perspective on, well, why do we need to have as much as we do? And, the chasing after things of money and things of, tangible possessions, that kind of thing. That kind of left an imprint. We were only there for 4 months, and I was in like 7th or 8th grade. So that's one experience. Again, I haven't been out of the country really to speak of for a long time now, but just traveling around and meeting people, it's all these differences that are portrayed in the media don't really exist in real life. I mean, you go out and you talk to people, and they're people, no matter, and then the media, you go to the media and social media especially, and you see people trying to create divisions and exploiting divisions. So people are people.
I've said that, I mean, internationally and then just domestically as well. We're told that there are all these groups that don't like each other, and they're dangerous to each other, and then you walk out your front door and you don't see race wars or extremism, related violence or whatever it is, and of course they occur. I mean, there's horrible things that occur all over the planet. But I would argue, especially in this country, I mean, they're the absolute extremes. They're the minority groups that are doing these kind of things and even having these conversations. If you were king for a day, I would normally ask this later in the conversation, but seeing as we're going to talk about chasing money at the expense of human lives and suffering, if you were king for a day, what do we do to get back to that community that we as human beings have relied on for millennia before?
Yeah, wow. That's if I were king for a day. Hadn't thought about that one because the possibility never really seemed within grasp. But I think a lot of it is it's just like having conversations, educating people, talking to people, getting points of view, talking about different ways to do things. It seems like we are less communicative now, even though we have more tools of communication than we were, 20 or 30 years ago. And so I think we need to get back to actually face-to-face, one-on-one communication, and keeping an open mind and having understanding that in the long run, if we prioritize people and not profit and things, in the long run, it's going to be better. We're all about short term. What can I get today, tomorrow, the next couple of hours? And we don't take the long view. And I think it's important. People should try to think about, hey, look at the long run. What's going to be best, a year, 2 years, 5 years from now. But human beings don't do that. So I would try to encourage people to take the long view and not look at what the next few hours are going to bring so much.
Absolutely. We'll just kind of revisit in earlier life for a moment. What were you playing as far as sports and exercise?
I tried. I was a wannabe athlete, but I didn't have the skills. So in school, I played football, tried my hand at basketball. Eventually, when I was getting ready to go into the military, I knew I needed to do certain things to prepare myself physically. So I started running, and so I've kind of kept that up over the years. Although now, running would be an exaggeration of what I actually do. It's probably more of a fast walk, maybe not even a fast walk, but I try to get out and run 3 or 4 times a week. And being near Charleston, near the beach, I like running on the beach. That's kind of my vibe now.
Now, what about career aspirations? You mentioned about obviously following the law journey once you got into kind of the ROTC route. Were you always dreaming of that when you were younger, or was there something else you had in your mind?
Not really. I wanted to do things. Wanted to do things that being a professional football player, that kind of stuff that were not really realistic. But when I was in college and I was looking at, okay, I owe the Army 4 years. What am I going to do? And then I just thought about, I decided I wanted to go to law school because I had an interest in justice, and seeing injustice in the world kind of got my juices flowing, saying that that's something I need to try to fix. And so I decided to go to law school for that reason, number one, and number two, to put off going in the Army for 3 years. And then, when I finished law school, there were 2 things I decided I would never do. I would never do criminal law, and I would never do tax law. And so in 1986, when I went to the Department of Justice, uh, I was hired to go to the criminal tax division, of course. So that was a lesson in never say never. And, I actually liked it and had was pretty good at it, I guess.
What was it that made you retain that passion for justice? And again, I'm brushing with a very broad stroke at the moment, but we have a large subsection of the legal community in the kind of lawsuit side that in some areas are very predatory. And again, in our profession, we saw that, the ambulance chasers. And then we've got people that have had, multiple people on the show that have fought tooth and nail and, put everything on the line to do what's right. And obviously that was something that's burning still to this day in your heart. Where did that come from, and how did you hang on to that when maybe there was the lure for going on some of these more financially lucrative paths instead?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where that came from. It just is there, and it continues to be there. For my first, well, my entire career up to this point was in government service. I went from the Army to Federal Railroad Administration for a couple of years, to the Department of Justice for 33 years. And once I retired from the Department of Justice, I went to the Virginia Attorney General's office. And so my experience with private practice has just been in the last 6 months. And so I always felt, I guess I like being, I like detective stories. I like stories about good versus evil and good triumphing. And I always wanted to be on the good side, one of the good guys, one of the white hats. So I guess that just was somehow there. And so I kind of prided myself. Hey, I've never been in private practice. I've done government service my entire, almost 40-year career. And the, feeling like I was doing something to benefit the public, benefit society, just kind of gave me motivation. In criminal prosecutions, to me, it was about the victims and about the safety of the community, and about maintaining a system of justice that is not perfect, but it's probably the best we can do given the human flaws that we bring to systems, and giving people confidence that there's at least some place where there's a little bit of more equality, and that people that have means and financial resources and power don't necessarily rule the day all the time, although that's kind of changed now. But that was sort of being part of it. That's kind of a system that tried to level the playing field. I took a lot of pride in.
You say that's changed now. What has changed?
To me, I was always proud of being working for the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, both at the main office, the main justice in Washington, and then later at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and always feeling that I was there to do justice, not necessarily to win cases. And I was there to do justice in an even-handed manner. And I see that the Department of Justice is now being used to settle personal scores for personal gain. I think it's being actually abused, and it's like in less than a year, it's become very sad to me what the Department of Justice has become, and a lot of people, very good lawyers, career lawyers, who looked at making that a career because of the ideals that the department used to promote, have left. And so what you have now is a skeleton that is run by people who have no honor and who have no morals and who have no ethics, who are there just for personal gain and and political gain. And yeah, I'll say it. That's what it is now. It's a travesty.
I mean, this is what we need to be talking about. I've been very open about the last few presidents that we've had. It's this, I've always said, same person, different colored tie, and obviously there are extremes on both sides. But the hijacking of the American people is so blatantly obvious. But when you get people to be so entrenched in, well, this is my party or this is my president, and they forget that the people come first. And again, I think I would argue we both come from professions that understand that, that we leave our families to go and, better the country as a whole. It makes me so sad. It really, really does. And when you're so hoodwinked, and I think, divided because you're so overworked, stressed, fearful of these bad guys that we're told are out there, it's so much easier to divide a country. And we saw that sadly in COVID. And if I wish there would be some kind of national awakening where everyone just realized, okay, is this A, kind, or B, unkind? It's that simple. Are these people
Right.
doing what's best for the country or best for themselves? And I think you'd be able to filter out the chaff immediately and get good people back in these positions again.
Right. No, I agree. Yes. We're in a sad state of affairs right now, and so all we can do is try to individually work to, get back to where we should be.
Now, I want to move on, but just quickly, if everyone listening, in the ability in their own hands, how do we start going back, regardless of whichever political system is in power at that moment? How do we start regaining this country again and putting the right people in these positions?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. From my point of view, it's partially why I went back, back into the game in April. A door open opportunity. So I'm now with a whistleblower, a small whistleblower firm based in D.C. And so, it's one of those. You do what you can do in terms of trying to change things for the better, and so that kind of door opened and kind of fit my talent, I think, to represent whistleblowers, and so and to continue to fight against injustice. So we can only do it what we have the ability and the talent to do. But we should do something. Okay, yeah, whatever it is you're able to do, whether it's broadcast, having a podcast, or going out and volunteering at a shelter or Meals on Wheels, helping people, that doing good or bringing light against darkness. However that looks. I mean, we're not going to go out there and all of a sudden you're going to snap your fingers and things are going to change. But you can do, each of us has the talent and the ability to do something. It may seem small, but even a small thing has a ripple effect that can affect in a positive way a larger number of people. So I would say just even volunteering to get out into the community and help people in need, because there are a lot of people in need, and I can see in the next couple of years even more people being in need, the way the economy is going, the way the cost of living is going, the way insurance is being, health insurance is being taken away from people. I think that being light in darkness, and I know that's a kind of a nebulous concept, but being light in darkness by doing things to help people, I think individually is one way of fighting back.
I couldn't agree more. They say you want to change the world, start at home. And even like you said, what you're doing, I mean, having a much bigger impact than I am, but what we are collectively doing, each of us is a drop of water. But if all of you stand side by side, now you're a waterfall, you're a force of nature. So I agree 100%. Well, before we get to when Purdue Pharma came on your radar, Prior to that, I know in Dopesick they made reference that you were taking down mobsters. So what were some of the kind of career cases that you had prior to Oxycontin?
Yeah, so that case, so in the tax division, doing criminal work from the tax division at DOJ, one of the initiatives that we had in the early '90s was to go after excise tax fraud, which was a thing that organized crime was using to make a lot of money with relatively low risk. And so there was an initiative. We focused on the Long Island, New York, so Eastern District of New York. And so there was a group of us that went up there to work on excise tax cases that involved organized crime in the background. So one of those cases I had was a case that involved the head of the Russian mob at the time, a gentleman named Murat Balagula. And so myself and another attorney, a co-counsel, prosecuted that case in a 2-week trial, and we got a conviction of him and a couple of his associates. So that was the case that was alluded to as the mob, prosecuting mobsters in Dopesick. And there were other, the cases I did were tax fraud cases. So they were different from, they involved people of means, kind of just cheating on their taxes. And I think there was another case involving an attorney that I did right at the time I was moving from Main Justice to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Virginia, an attorney in southwestern Virginia who was setting up companies for a coal mine operation and other, a lot of business corruption. That's where I learned about business corruption. It kind of crosses all different occupations, including healthcare. At the end of the day, it's corruption that involves most of the time stealing money from the government, right? And so tax monies or healthcare monies. So the case, we prosecuted involving a lawyer who was setting up shell corporations for a coal mine operator who would, again, steal the tax money and employment taxes, especially. In an employment tax case where an employer is stealing the employment taxes, they're really also hurting their employees because a portion of that money is supposed to go to the employees in terms of their Social Security taxes, and Medicare taxes, those kinds of things. So those employees end up with a zero where the employer collects the money from them but does not submit it to the government in essence, and their records then get screwed up with the government in terms of their Social Security contributions and the like. So that was there was another case that we again had I think it was a 2-week trial and convicted the attorney and then the judge didn't want to sentence him, so we had an appeal, and so that case dragged on for a few years. So a couple of cases like that, and I did domestic violence, kidnapping cases, and illegal gun cases, and some drug cases, and then getting into now we've got doctors who are overprescribing opioids. And that was kind of the entree into the world of pharma.
So walk me through that kind of on-ramp to that then, through your perspective.
Yeah, so I moved from Washington, D.C. down to a place called Abingdon, Virginia, which is in the Appalachian Mountain region of Virginia, where the corner of Virginia it's like a triangle, and that corner touches on where 5 states come together: Tennessee, North Carolina, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And so it's a very rural and economically depressed area. Coal mining is big down there, farming. But a lot of people, especially those who work in the coal mine industry and get injured, there's a lot of injuries, physical injuries, end up being on disability and being on Medicaid and needing pain relief. And so there's, unlike the cities where was a problem with street drugs, down there the problem was prescription drugs because people could get pills. Doctors were prescribing opioids. A lot of people had legitimate reasons for them, but a lot of people didn't. And so going down into that environment and seeing that was an issue, a problem with the community, our office, our little office, three-person office in Abingdon, started looking at, we're part of the community there. It's being in a small office, you're part of it. You're part of the people. You're not like in some ivory tower as a prosecutor waiting for people to bring stuff to you. You're out there in the community, and we saw that, hey, there's a problem with pills on the street. That's a problem. And as a federal prosecutor, we wanted to look at going to the root of the problem, not just going and prosecuting people on the street who are largely addicted to opioids and just trying to feed their addiction, but go up to where the source is. So we started looking at doctors. And we had a big project in the late 90s where we targeted a half a dozen or more doctors who based on the data were overprescribing opioids, and we began prosecuting them into the late 90s to the early 2000s, and then we started hearing some things coming from the community. Number one, the local law enforcement said there's a huge spike in overdoses of this new drug called Oxycontin. And that in addition to that, their communities were being ravaged by crime, most of it related to people trying to get money to buy Oxycontin on the street, which was selling at $1 per milligram, and the pills were in 20, 40, 80, and 160 milligram quantities. And then we also heard from some local pharmacists that they were getting aggressively pursued by Purdue Pharma sales reps whenever they were hesitant to fill a prescription, because in a small town, the pharmacist knows everybody, okay? And they know who's, maybe doesn't really need the pills, who's abusing them, who's selling them. And so when they hesitated to fill some prescriptions they thought were questionable, a Purdue Pharma rep would come in and be very aggressive with them. And they did, we got complaints about that. So one day, my co-counsel, Randy Ramsire, and I were just sitting around the office talking about those things at the end of the day. And we decided maybe we need to open up an investigation on Purdue Pharma because of this information we were getting, and just see what's going on. Why are we being ravaged by Oxycontin, and why are they pursuing pharmacists so aggressively? So that was around 2000, late 2000, early 2001, we decided we would open an investigation. And which was unusual because most investigations get opened up in the prosecutor's office because law enforcement has come in and said, hey, we have a case here. This was one that we generated from our side. Probably almost never happens from the prosecutor's side because of the information that we got from the community and the feeling that we needed to look into this just because, it's our home and our community, and things did not appear to be right.
When I moved to America, I went to Fire Academy in Orlando, and then I moved down to the Miami area and was testing. And my now ex, my wife at the time, got a job in a doctor's office, and at the same time, I remember one time I was sick, and I don't normally ever see a doctor, but it was one of those ones where I need antibiotics. This thing isn't going to go anywhere. And I remember sitting in a doctor's office for hours and watching these model women, usually with a little kind of roll-on suitcase, going into the doctor's office. And it never even occurred to me at the time. I'm just like, okay, well, this is annoying. These drug reps are getting ahead of us. But then my son's mother said, this is so weird. We've got people flying from all over the country down to this doctor, and he gives them a prescription, and then they fly away. And this was Broward County, Florida. So I had a very, a naive at the time, view of exactly what we were about to talk about. So you mentioned the drug reps. Talk to me about the Army and the kind of predatory practice that Purdue was deliberately creating to prey upon these medical practitioners and skew their understanding of the drug.
Yeah. So, you've seen Dopesick. So the thing about Dopesick is that the underlying, of course, it's jazzed up for TV, right? The dialogue and kind of the sequence of events all kind of jazzed up for TV, but the underlying storyline that about how Purdue marketed the drug is very accurate in Dopesick. When I was talking to the creator of Dopesick, Danny Strong, he came and interviewed me, and I told him the only reason I'm talking to you is because I want to make sure you get the facts right in terms of what our investigation found. And so that storyline is very accurate in terms of what actually happened and what Purdue did. And what Purdue did was they used data, right? They looked and saw where most of the opioids were the regular opioids, the smaller dose opioids, like the Percocets and those kinds of things. They saw where most of those were being prescribed. And of course, it was in locations that were generally like Appalachia in southwestern Virginia, eastern Kentucky, and southern West Virginia, where you had people who worked in occupations that were physical in nature, and there were injuries, and then they would go and once they were injured, they'd get pain pills. So they targeted places like that. And they targeted Maine, where the timber industry was. They targeted where the coal mining industry was. Florida, I'm not sure exactly why they targeted Florida, but probably because of the older population and then, the physical ailments that come with aging. But they took that data and they said, we're going to go in. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but they said, we're going to go into these places where there's a large opioid market, and we're going to take our drug and we're going to say our drug is better than the other drugs that you are prescribing. Their market research found that one of the things that doctors were hesitant about was the potential for addiction that would come from these larger quantities of the opioid, of oxycodone that were in their pills. And so they created this marketing program to some extent in collusion with the FDA, which we can talk about in a minute, where they went in and told the doctors who had people, the doctors are having to make decisions based on just looking at someone who says I'm in pain, which is very subjective, and deciding, well, do I write a prescription or not? Am I going to get them addicted or not? Are they abusing it or selling it or not? There's a lot of unknowns for the doctors. So when Purdue comes in and tells the doctors, hey, we've got this new drug, it's in a delayed release delivery system, and therefore that makes it less addictive than these other drugs that you're prescribing. And oh, by the way, because it's in this delivery system, it's also less prone to abuse. All of those things were blatant lies. The doctor is going to be put in a position where, hey, I either prescribe the same old stuff that has addiction and abuse potential, or I prescribe Oxycontin, which, hey, I'm being told uh, in a credible fashion is less addictive and less prone to abuse. In fact, some of them were told it can't be abused because of this delivery system. The doctor's put in a position where they almost have to prescribe, right, Oxycontin. And that's kind of what happened. What, I can get into the FDA's role in this if you want me to.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
At the risk of, I don't want to be droning on, but so what happened, and this is what, again, this is also part and parcel to what's portrayed in Dopesick. Purdue, of course, had to get OxyContin approved by the FDA, and this is in around 1994 to 1995, as it got approved at the end of 94. So this is 94. There was an FDA reviewer, a doctor named Dr. Curtis Wright, who was assigned to review and approve OxyContin for the FDA. Now, Dr. Wright, it was a trained and had practiced as an addictionologist. Okay, he had treated addiction of various kinds, including opioids. So, he was the person, I think, at FDA who they said, okay, he's got expertise in this area, he should review it. Now, what Dr. Wright did, apparently, was, and it's a little murky, but he had meetings outside of the FDA's office with Purdue Pharma's executives, or the team that they put together to get OxyContin through the FDA. And one of the things that comes with a new drug that's approved by the FDA is what's called a package insert. Okay. And, when you go and pick up a prescription from the pharmacy, you get like this stack of papers, right, that you don't read. You kind of just throw away. Well, that's the package. That's the patient version of the package insert. So there's also a more official physician's version of the package insert, which talks about, the dosing, the frequency, potential side effects, has a lot of information in it. One of the things that the Purdue folks got put into that package insert, courtesy of Curtis Wright, was the statement that delayed release, as provided by Oxycontin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. Okay. So if you think about that statement, what does it really mean?
Nothing.
It doesn't mean nothing, but it's got language in there that kind of says this is the FDA's approved language for this drug. So when a sales rep would walk into a doctor's office to promote OxyContin, and they would tell the doctor, hey, we got pills that have 10, 20, 40, 80, 160 milligrams of oxycodone in them, and they are less addictive. And the doctor, who has any kind of street smarts even, and has any kind of training, says, you're crazy. That amount of oxycodone in one pill, there's no way it's less addictive than a 10 milligram Percocet pill. And so the sales rep pulls out the package insert and says, look, read this language here. Believed to reduce, according to the FDA, this is the FDA's official position, our pills are believed to reduce its abuse liability. That's kind of the hook that they had to convince doctors that what they were telling them, the blatant lie of less addiction and less abusability, was there was some truth there, because it was endorsed by the FDA with that ridiculous language that was approved by Dr. Wright, who should have known better because he was trained in treating addiction. I spent a lot of time investigating him because I said there's something there, but I could never never prove any kind of corruption or any kind of, payoff or anything like that. And then the rules for one of the problems with our government is that the rules for conflicts of interest are so lax that there's nothing that he did that was a violation of any kind of regulation or rule or conflict of interest. But that to me is really the thing. The FDA was fully complicit in the opioid crisis because that language was allowed to be in that package insert for the first 7 years that the drug was on the market.
Quick question. After the FDA, who did Curtis Wright work for?
He went to work, yes. He went to work for, so he left the FDA and he went into some obscure pharmaceutical company for about 12 to 18 months. My view, to make it look good. And then he went to work for Purdue Pharma at $400,000 a year, I think about quadruple his FDA salary. And yeah, that was all very suspicious.
I mean, we see it over and over again. People that were in the government that then work for weapons manufacturers. I mean, all these people that are obviously greasing the pathways for their companies to benefit off the American people. Then, lo and behold, a year, 2 years later, they're working for the very, organizations that they were supposed to be regulating. And again, it is us that is paying the price. I mean, I saw it as a paramedic. The number of opioid deaths that I went to, I'd say one of the biggest, the largest amount of people that I saved was simply through Narcan. Mm-hmm. And Narcan not being invented, I'd have a lot more deaths on my career. So this is what blows my mind, is that this happens over and over and over again. And yet, those people aren't held accountable, and it is directly at the cost of American men, women, and children.
Yes, that's... and that's existed for a long time. It's called the revolving door, is one of the phrases that's used. When I worked in D.C. back in the 80s, we talked about that all the time. So the revolving door has been there for decades, maybe longer. It is a flaw in our system that people can capitalize on their government service and go out and in a conflict of interest scenario, and they also come back, and part of what happened in Purdue was the phone call from the, well-financed, well-connected defense lawyers to the Department of Justice. The connections there also exist. Those are two things that, and should be fixed. I don't know that there's a will to do that, but the conflict of interest of coming into government and greasing the skids and then going out and capitalizing on your work for the government that you make didn't do the way you should do, and then also the concept of certain people being able to make phone calls to people who are in decision-making positions with that kind of influence. Those are two things that are a real problem, and like you say, cost lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's portrayed in Dopesick, but the Giuliani connection, was he directly related to Purdue Pharma as well?
Yeah. So as our case progressed and we got to the point of, okay, we've got this, we're ready to pull the trigger. What normally happens is we'll reach out to the company attorneys and say, hey, we're going to provide you, we're going to sit down with you and sort of give you a preview of what we found in our investigation to see if you want to come to a resolution before we go, formally to court. They brought in Giuliani as kind of their fixer, right? And the reason they brought in Giuliani was this was 2006. So there's the election cycle for 2008 was getting ready to gear up. Giuliani at that time was viewed as one of the leading candidates for the Republican nomination for president Okay, this was 2006. He was coming off of the 9/11, and he was, America's mayor, all that kind of stuff. And so he was brought in because of that power that he had as a potential Republican presidential candidate, which meant that he had a direct line. He could pick up the phone and call the decision makers in the Department of Justice, who were part of the Bush administration, Republicans, which he did, and get and exert influence that way. So that, again, my view, that absolutely happened. That's why we had proposed the prosecution, felony prosecutions of not only the company, but the three top executives at the time. So in our case was criminal. It was, almost exclusively criminal until we reached the settlement phase. And in a criminal case, as you probably know, or many people know, is you start at the bottom and you work your way up to get to the top, right? So our view was that we wanted to prosecute the highest level of corporate officer that the evidence allowed us to do in applying the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And we had gotten to the CEO, the general counsel, and the medical director. But above them were the board of directors, okay, the Sackler family. And what we needed, we had some information about the Sackler family, certain of the Sacklers, 2 or 3 of the Sacklers, in particular one, Richard Sackler, who was calling the shots. We had some information about him, but we needed one more witness, right? One of these top 3 guys to roll up on the person that was directing them to do things. And so the thinking was that if they were faced with felony prosecutions or even felony convictions, those guys, one or more of them, might very well decide they wanted to cooperate to get out from under prison time. So that was sort of where we had postured the case when we went up to the Department of Justice, because it had to be approved at that level. And that's kind of where Rudy Giuliani exercised his influence, because we had meetings up there and we were told that we were not going to be allowed to prosecute any of the individuals.
Just to clarify, as we sit here in 2025, I've looked, for many posts and things that I've talked about in the last few years. We lose basically 100,000 people annually to the opioid crisis. So all these people that we've talked about, the FDA, Giuliani, all these other people that are benefiting financially from this, are doing so as we lose 100,000 Americans every single year.
Can I add to that? Yes, 100,000 were well over 1 million opioid overdose deaths, but also think about the countless millions more of people who have become addicted to opioids and the impact on their families. Okay, you're not talking about it's horrible that you have overdose deaths and those families impacted. On top of that, you have the addiction of millions and what that does to their families, right? It is, it's not just limited to 100,000 deaths per year. You're talking, if you add in the families, I believe the families are victims as well.
100%.
And so you're talking about literally, I don't know, 10 million, 20 million, 50 million people who are impacted in one way or another. And yes, it just kind of boggles the mind that there really is no justice for those families and those people. I mean, I have, once I retired, I decided I would do whatever I could for victims. And so I've got a few contacts in in the opioid victim community. In fact, a fella that I've been a friend that I've met through this process named Ed Bish lost his son in 2001, 18-year-old son in 2001 when nobody really knew what was going on. It took one Oxycontin pill, and ended up dead, just like that, And so he's been fighting for justice now for almost 25 years. The families want to see, and I believe the only way you deter that kind of conduct is to criminally prosecute those who are responsible. And I'm talking about responsible corporate officers, not street dealers, not middle managers, but the people at the top who are making the decisions that result in the illegal marketing or the false marketing of drugs that doctors then prescribe and that end up killing people and ruining families and lives. The government, this is another problem. Let's say the third flaw in the government is that the enforcement program for pharmaceutical companies in general and opioid manufacturers in particular is to go after companies and make companies pay fines. That's the enforcement program. Well, the fines are never going to be high enough to match the profits that were made. Therefore, the fines that the government collects from these companies is the cost of doing business. And they have profited so much that their conduct is not going to change. Companies are not driverless cars, okay? Companies do illegal conduct because responsible corporate officials made decisions that they will do illegal conduct, and those responsible corporate officials need to be held accountable. And until you start holding them accountable, that conduct is not going to change. That's the only way you're going to change corporate conduct, is to hold the responsible corporate officers or officials or executives who made the decisions to have the company do illegal things. You have to hold them accountable. Otherwise, nothing changes. And that's borne out. I mean, you can go and look at how many, the number of companies that the Department of Justice has prosecuted either criminally or civilly over the past 25 years. It's in the thousands, okay? And they've collected lots of money. They'll press releases of the billions of dollars that have been collected. Nothing changes then. If you're doing it for 25 years and you're still collecting that money, somebody ought to wake up and say, wait a minute, nothing's changing. Behavior is not changing. We're just collecting money. It's like for those companies, it's like a speeding ticket. Write a check, keep doing what you're doing because you're making so much money. And this is something that we were wanting to do from the beginning of the Purdue case. We knew that the conduct would not change unless you held the responsible corporate officers accountable. And we were not allowed to do that for political reasons.
Well, let's talk then about that. Talk about the initial settlement. I know it's in the news again at the moment. How much was the settlement? And then let's contrast that, exactly what you're talking about, with how much was made off, the blood of the American people that took this and died.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go into the lead into the settlement. We met at the Department of Justice and made presentations to the high officials, to the Assistant Attorney General for Criminal, who was delegated by the Deputy Attorney General to handle all the meetings and all the stuff involved. And so the Purdue attorneys were allowed to meet. They didn't have a time limit. When we went up there, we were given an hour. When we were done with the meeting, I was waiting outside. The U.S. attorney, my immediate boss, came out from meeting with the assistant attorney general and some other aides and said he was all upset. They're not going to let us prosecute the individuals, and they want us to resolve this case. So we met with the Purdue attorneys that evening, and we basically managed to salvage having those three executives plead guilty to misdemeanors. So there was some, and if you look again at the records of the department, that in and of itself is very rare. Okay, you could probably count on one hand the number of executives that they have actually had to plead guilty to something of all the thousands of cases that have been done. So we, at the time, we were feeling at least we salvaged that. Those guys are going to get a conviction, although it's a misdemeanor, and there's no incentive for them to cooperate because there's not going to be any jail time. We at least thought we had salvaged that. And then the amount of money that we required Purdue to pay was, I think, around $650 million, if I recall correctly. So it was a $650 million, three misdemeanor pleas by the top three executives. And we thought, given that the department would basically cut our legs out from under us, we thought that was like, that's the best we're going to do. It's not satisfactory, but it's something, and maybe we can shine the light on Purdue Pharma as being this criminal, lying, lie-telling company, and maybe the public will see that, and conduct will change accordingly. Unfortunately, no. And by that time, I think, as I recall, Purdue had made probably in the neighborhood of $3 or $4 billion. So a $650 million, payment, cost of doing business, right? So I went on to do other things, other cases, but what happened in the meantime, and I've gone back and looked and read a lot of the documentation. In 2007, that's when our case was resolved. It went to court. The guilty pleas were entered. The judgments were entered. And at that point, apparently not too long after, the Purdue board of directors, the Sackler family, decided to hire this public relations firm called McKinsey to see how they could, quote, turbocharge Oxycontin sales. Okay. So again, perhaps naively, I thought, oh, well, they dodged a bullet, right? We were threatening a whole lot more, but they got off, relatively easily. Maybe they're going to change their behavior. No, they decided to double down and hired the public relations firm so they could turbocharge Oxycontin sales. And so that's what they did. They targeted, and this is in the 2020 guilty plea. Okay, so now you have a two-time drug dealing offender. If it was any of us, the second time, they'd lock us up and throw away the key, right? So the 2020 case, they turbocharged Oxycontin sales. They targeted the doctors who were the highest prescribers and who were the most likely to be diverting, overprescribing, and knowingly prescribing to abusers. And they sold, I think, around $11 billion in Oxycontin between 2008 and 2016. At the same time, in 2007, 2008, the Sackler family had conversations apparently among themselves and said, hey, somebody else is going to come after us. We need to make sure we move our money to places where it cannot be reached. And this is in the Supreme Court's opinion on the bankruptcy. They began in 2008 taking money out of Purdue, basically leaving Purdue just bare bones operating fund, and moving it offshore to offshore accounts into family businesses to prevent anyone from coming after their money after they did this next set of crimes from 2008 to 2016. And the crimes that they had Purdue do under the McKinsey guidance were much more serious even. I mean, the crimes that I prosecuted were lying about the drug to doctors. The crimes that they committed involved, that the company pled guilty to in 2020 were crimes related to straight up narcotics trafficking, healthcare fraud, and paying kickbacks. Okay. Now, 2020's case, not a single executive, not a single individual has been prosecuted for those more egregious crimes for that second, the recidivism crimes. Not a single, and that is, to me, that is outrageous. That is completely outrageous. There are documents that are filed, and the Sacklers actually had a civil settlement themselves that involved themselves, a civil settlement. The language in that civil settlement, there's always something called covered conduct. The covered conduct in that civil settlement, to which the Sacklers don't agree, but the government does not put covered conduct into a document that's filed in the courts unless it has a basis to do that. It shows that the Sacklers were making the decisions regarding the criminal conduct that occurred from 2008 to 2016. So that's, it becomes really outrageous at this point. And you have them on top of that to add to the outrage, because all of their money is overseas, and now they've got this flood of lawsuits coming in from government agencies and private individuals. They put the company in bankruptcy. Okay. They choose a bankruptcy court in White Plains, New York, where the judge has a very favorable disposition towards allowing non-parties to get releases. So, of course, part of the settlement that's advanced by Purdue for the bankruptcy is that the Sackler family members and a whole list of others, including corporate officers in Purdue, are going to get releases from all civil liability out of a bankruptcy that just involves the company. And so you have essentially the Sackler family who the Supreme Court has documented laundered money out of Purdue, which pled guilty, which makes that money the proceeds of criminal conduct, getting the benefit of a bankruptcy that they're not a party to. Okay. So outrage upon outrage and complete breakdown of the whole justice system is what I see. And the government, the Department of Justice under, three different administrations. You have the Trump administration originally, the Biden administration, and the Trump administration second, have done nothing. Okay.
Which underlines our point. It's not about the Republicans or the Democrats. It's the wrong kind of people in these positions. And, when you look at the way that the Sacklers are portrayed, it mirrors something that I've kind of had an awakening myself about only a year ago. Is I've spent 9 years talking about mental health as one of the topics when it comes to, first responders and military members and doctors and nurses and, everyone else. And when you talk about that in our profession, you talk about us, the guys on the streets, the ones, trying to save the lives of the very people that we've been talking about for the last hour. But we don't talk about the people that are at the helm, whether it's a fire chief, whether it's a president, whether it's a CEO. And if there is unaddressed mental ill health and a sociopath is allowed to be at the helm of, this kind of company, where people are dying, whether you're burying your own soldiers or firefighters, or whether your product is killing people, and you sleep soundly at night, you are not, fit for that position. And we do not have that discussion. I mean, the current, I would say, like, as you just alluded to, the last, what would that be, 9+ years, the people that we've had leading this country are unfit, mentally unfit, and yet we just turn our heads.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with money, right? The companies that do these things are making campaign contributions, paying lobbyists big money to go knock on doors up on Capitol Hill and in Washington in general. And that, unfortunately, is what is kind of ruling the day. Kind of what we see in the nursing home industry as well. I mean, I think it covers most of the healthcare industry, where lobbying and campaign contributions sway public policy and legislation. And people, ordinary people, there's a lot of advocates that say, let's write our congressman and let's send emails to the congressmen and to the senators, et cetera. But I'm kind of a cynic now. I don't know that I should, people should take this with a grain of salt, okay? My view is this. The companies that are making money, that making huge profits off of a system that is broken, they go to the congressmen, the senators, and the legislatures, even at the state level, with bags of cash, okay? And they get a seat at the table, they get heard. If you're just writing letters because you don't have bags of cash, or you're sending emails, they don't care, okay? They don't, my view is they do not care, because the cash is more important to them. And so people need to understand what's going on, that this is the system that we have. And I think the only way that we can change that is that people learn about it, they understand it, and they get outraged about it, and they vote those people out. Those people should. There's too many people that are just sitting in their positions, making plenty of money to finance advertising for their campaigns, but they're really not doing anything. They're actually hurting people, right? And I know that sometimes we feel powerless to do that, but I think that if we were to educate ourselves and come together, again, the need to come together, because there's an advantage to dividing the people, right? They don't come together. We can come together and try to make a change, but it's not going to happen as long as we keep, lining up and thinking that we're all divided.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's funny when you were talking about the lack of accountability. I was just thinking, tongue in cheek, how the National Guard needs to put it in DC, not the streets of these cities. If you're talking about criminals that are causing hundreds of thousands of deaths, annually, whether it's through obesity, whether it's through addiction, whether it's through these chemical companies poisoning or tobacco or whatever it is. I mean, that's where we should be deploying people. With that being said, I had Sam Quinones on the show, who wrote Dreamland, and his perspective was he did a good job of kind of detailing the pharmaceutical side, but then also the closing of the pill mills about the time that we're talking about now. And again, I remember the one in Orlando having the line of people around it, and then one day it was shut down. So now you've got all these addicts that were spoon-fed through the legal route. Now that's taken away, and now you've got the cartels coming from Mexico. Again, the same exact business model. Let's target where these addicts are. Again, these same kind of industrial towns where there aren't already big gang presences. And now that's what led to the heroin spike, and then we had fentanyl, and obviously now we're losing more people than ever because of the potency of that. one thing that if we're talking about healing and we're talking about coming together and we're talking about being proactive, I've said this story many times on here. My mum moved to Portugal about 25 years ago. And when I started the podcast, she said, "Do you know what we did here in Portugal for addiction?" And what had happened, they had had a massive opioid crisis after a war in one of their colonies. They did the traditional war on drugs, and it just didn't work. And so they truly democratically, not demostocracy like we have here, where you got to be rich and no ethics, but actually put it to the people, and they voted to put addiction in the hands of the medical community. So they decriminalized addiction. Doesn't mean you can go into the grocery store and buy meth. You just, if you get caught with the user's amount, you get educated on the resources that are available to you. The smugglers still go to jail. The dealers still go to jail. But what they found is less than 10 years by destigmatizing being an addict and not giving them a criminal record for simply chasing their fix. They gave them addiction counseling. They gave them mental health counseling. There was job creation. There was housing. And less than 10 years, they went to the lowest addiction rate in the world, I believe. Incredible. Yeah. What is your stance on decriminalization or legalization when it comes to the addict? Again, not the dealer, not the smuggler, but taking addiction and truly putting it into the world and funding it into the hands of the medical community.
So back in around 2017 to 2018, when I was the U.S. attorney in the Western District of Virginia, I was working with DEA supervisors and other law enforcement. One of the things that we were saying back then in the law enforcement community is, we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this problem, okay? It's a three-prong approach that needed to be taken, and as we were discussing back then. Yeah, we go and arrest the dealers and the smugglers and those people, but you've got to have treatment. The treatment is inadequate, right? It's if you live in a rural area, you've got to travel miles to get treatment. You got to have a strong treatment base, and you got to try to get people who are addicted into those treatment centers, and you got to have prevention, right? You got to go start talking to, maybe back then it was middle schoolers, but now you got to go start talking to elementary schoolers and educating them about what it is the dangers, right? The death, the addiction, what that looks like. So we were having those conversations in 2017, 2018. It sounds like they've stopped. Okay, we're shutting the borders. We're gonna arrest everybody, and we're gonna bomb boats that are bringing drugs in. Okay, well that's all well and good, but you got millions of people who are addicted as a result of corporate malfeasance. Okay. And you've shut off the supply. And so now they're having to go get more dangerous drugs. I mean, there's stuff that, fentanyl and worse, believe it or not, worse than fentanyl, carfentanil and xylazine and all kinds of other substances that are out there. Where's the treatment? Okay. I don't see much improvement in 10 years since we've known about this problem. We grappled with this problem with treatment. One of the takeaways from Dopesick, not the story of my case, but one of the takeaways that I thought was good from Dopesick was the destigmatizing of addiction. Okay, that there are many different ways to provide treatment. I used to be kind of a skeptic of medication assisted treatment, but on the other hand, the cold turkey gutted out didn't seem to be working real well. So you got to just deploy all of the treatment options and make those available. I don't see that being done very well right now. And I see almost no prevention, quite frankly. Nobody's going out and trying to warn and educate young people about, the dangers of opioids and becoming addicted. If you count Purdue's piece, another $57 billion or more have been collected from different pharmaceutical companies over the past several years into these funds that are supposed to be going to opioid abatement. I am very skeptical about how those are going to be used. A lot of them are going to just go to cover government programs and deficits and tax reduction and all that. I don't see, there is not, we don't have we're not doing a good job with treatment and prevention. And yeah, I agree. I still view we're not going to arrest our way out of it. You can't throw everybody in prison, and that's not going to help. You're still going to have people addicted. So it needs to be a three-pronged approach. You're going to have to fight the battle on three fronts. Right now, we just seem to be all, as a society, focused on let's just arrest people and lock them up and throw away the key. That's not going to solve the problem.
If only we had a book by a really, kind, compassionate person that would create a religion of, empathy, and we could call it Christianity or something. We could work on that.
Yeah, well, the problem is that I think the word Christianity does not really, for the most part, convey the meaning that it really should. There's a lot of Christians in name only. Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think I've said this. They actually kind of made a picture the other day because there's that magnet that people put on their cars around this time of year, and it says "Keep Christ in Christmas," and I changed it to say "Keep Christ in Christianity" because I think that's far more important right now.
True. That's a good point there. Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about the opioid crisis, and we could talk for hours more on this, but I want to transition to what you're working on now. The same predatory practice, and ironically, I just had a conversation with a filmmaker yesterday, a friend of mine, who is kind of, again, in a way, whistleblowing the fact that our public pensions, city and county and states, are being used by private equity companies and being pilfered, and these are funding a lot of these things. So you've got drug companies. You've also got, as we talked, the other areas of healthcare. How did the world of nursing homes come on your radar? And let's kind of unpack that.
Yeah. So, just like a lot of things by happenstance, coming out of the Purdue case in 2007, a whistleblower attorney came to, Roanoke, Virginia, to meet and said they had a case against Abbott Laboratories, another pharmaceutical giant. And the case involved Abbott Laboratories marketing its anti-epileptic drug Depakote to nursing homes for the treatment of agitation and aggression in dementia patients in nursing homes. Well, it was completely not approved for that. And one of its Depakote side effects is somnolence. And so, of course, if you give an elderly patient in a nursing home who has dementia something that's going to put them to sleep, they will be less aggressive and less agitated. And so that's what they were marketing the drug for at that point. So that was my first foray into the nursing home world. And it was like one of those, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. Pharmaceutical companies in the opioid business preyed on people who were prone to addiction. And nobody's going to listen to an addict because they're vilified, right? Okay, so now they're coming into nursing homes and preying on these elderly people with dementia. And who's going to listen to a dementia person? They're not in their right mind. And so they go after these people who are marginalized, who have basically no voice and prey upon them to make money. And so, you know, we did that. We investigated that case for a couple of years and got it to the point where we had criminal and civil. It was a $1.5 billion total settlement, which at the time was, I think we believed, was the largest single drug settlement in history. And we also recommend prosecution of the top executive, and that got shot down at the highest, predictably at the highest levels of the department. And so that was my first entree into the nursing home world, and seeing, you know, kind of what those large companies were doing to vulnerable people kind of sparked the outrage in me. And then in the midst of that investigation, I got a colleague at the Health and Human Services Office of General Counsel sent me a survey report on a nursing home in far southwestern Virginia that was over 200 pages long. And basically she said, you need to take a look at this. And I read it and I was like appalled at the treatment of the residents in that facility. And I said, you know, I don't know how to do these cases, but we got to do something. So I opened up a criminal investigation of that nursing home, which was owned by someone who lived in Miami, an investor, kind of like similar to private equity, but on a smaller level, individual level. I think what happens is that they put together a package of nursing homes, and they make them investment opportunities for individual investors. And so you can buy into 4 or 5 or 6 nursing homes at different locations. So this was a guy in Miami who was like a private investor, and he had one of the operations officer lived in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And so it was like this, and the management office was in Miami, where they paid the bills and collected the money and all that. And so here we have this nursing home in a very rural area, small town in southwestern Virginia, and the residents are getting these horrific pressure sores. They're not being bathed. Their hair is not being cut. Their nails aren't being. I mean, it's just like they're living. It's unreal. And so I got to read patient records and reports and look at photos and, you know, all those horrors that sparked outrage in me. And so we investigated that case, and it took a long time because those cases are very difficult. We ended up using the racketeering statute as a means of grabbing the guy in Miami and the operations officer in Ohio, because they have plausible deniability. I'm not there every day. I come in once every quarter and, you know, check things out. I rely on the staff at the facility. But at the same time, wait a minute, no, you're calling the shots in terms of budget. And when the facility calls and says, oh, we need to buy washcloths, and you tell them no because that's out of the budget, or they call and say we need to hire a couple more people because we have nobody to work on weekends, and you say no, you got to be held responsible some way for that. So we use the racketeering statute in that case. But that kind of, again, was, you know, looking at those records. I mean, I tend, when I do a case, I tend to get into the weeds. I tend to look, you know, at the evidence. I tend to read the statements, the witness statements, and read the patient records and all that. So that gave me a kind of an education in how nursing homes work and the finances involved, and how the finances can be controlled by an outside party that's interested only in making money, while the facility itself and the residents are left basically to rot. So after doing that case, fast forward to, hey, I retired in 2022. All of a sudden, Dopesick was out, and I was getting all these requests to be on, you know, podcasts and interviews. And So this filmmaker out of Los Angeles named Susie Singer Carter had an experience with her mother, who was a dementia patient that she was the main caregiver for, contacted me to be on her podcast, but not to talk about Purdue specifically, but to talk about the Abbott case. So I did that. I went on her podcast, talked mostly about the Abbott case, and then after that, she reached out to me again and said, "Hey, I'm having issues with the nursing home. My mom, can you give me any guidance?" So I started. I tried to help her find an attorney to represent her and her mom out in Los Angeles. And I also started just kind of walking her through what I knew of the process and what her mom was going through and the root of the problems, basically a neglect and abuse issue, pressure sore, stage 4 pressure sore that went unreported, and, hospitalizations and all that. And, we got to the point where she was having a difficulty getting an attorney to agree to take the case. And we can talk about the whys of that in a little bit. And I just said, "Hey, wait a minute. Here's the problem. Elderly people with dementia in nursing homes, it's difficult for attorneys to see the value of a case that involves neglect and abuse of those people because there's no lost wages and there's no medical bills. The bills are being paid for by government programs. And those are usually the two main things for valuing a case by a lawyer. But the damages here are the pain and suffering, because it's horrific. Pain and suffering not only to your mom, but to the family, having to witness what's going on. And I said, "You're a filmmaker. Start taking videos. Show a day in the life. Show what's happening to your mom." So she did that, and that ultimately convinced an attorney to take the case, helped convince an attorney to take the case. And then when her mom finally passed, we were just having a conversation after, kind of an aftermath conversation. And it was a discussion about how the system, this is really a system problem. Her mom was the victim of a system that rewards understaffing, rewards neglect, has very little accountability for things that are, again, flashback to Purdue, there's very little individual accountability for those kinds of things on the part of owners and people making money off of it. How do we change that system? So the thought I had was, I worked all these cases. I spent hours and hours working these individual cases, and nothing seems to change in terms of the system. It just keeps getting worse. Maybe we need to go to the public and educate them, and maybe we need to do it. Where does the public get their information these days? It's film, YouTube, podcasts. They don't read for the most part. They don't watch traditional television. Nobody watches CNN anymore. Those kind of shows. You got a whole new generation that gets their information a different way. So we decided let's try to reach that next generation with a documentary. And so that's how we just came onto the production of No Country for Old People, which is currently a 3-part docuseries streaming on Amazon, with the thought of, we need to let the public know, especially the next generation who are going to inherit the problems, especially of aging, because there are so many of us who are aging right now. They are the next generation are the ones that get to figure out how to take care of us, and who need to know what's going on and what the problems are and what the root of the problems are. So that's the thought of, let's do this documentary, and whatever follows on to that, we're trying to figure out what to do next. In that area. But how do you convince people? And it's not only with nursing homes, but it's probably with a lot of other issues that our generation is handing a whole bunch of problems onto the next generation. We need to somehow prepare them for those problems.
Well, I think what you decided to do was, I agree 100% the right way. And I'm actually working on a TV adaptation of my last book to do the same thing. I think the way that you really get to the hearts and minds is you got to do it through the screen. That is where we
Mhm.
all are transfixed these days, and get people that understand it. That's what Dopesick did so well. Was it wasn't
Right.
just portraying the corruption and the dogmatic nature of the way your team was pursuing the case, but also the human stories. The
Hmm.
doctor that got addicted, the girl that almost made it out and didn't in the end. I mean, just these, the connection. Like Johann Hari says, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And you see
Hmm.
that when these families come together, people start healing, or these communities come together. And then the converse is also true. The more you divide, the more you prey upon people for your own personal gain, the more we start falling apart. And I think that the documentary world especially is doing such a great job of that at the moment. So we talked about, again, this horrendous predatory element when it came to Purdue. Talk to me about the nursing facility world, because I mean, I think you did a good job in the documentary of saying, look, it's not the nurses. There are some bad nurses. I've seen them as a paramedic. I've been
Right.
to awful nursing homes. My grandmother was in one in England that we paid, or she paid. Her my granddad left the money, but a lot of money, but she was treated so well. But they were just very lucky to have the money for that. And then
Right.
my brother-in-law's mother, she had the exact sores that you're talking about, and she ended up passing away. So
Yeah.
you make you're very deliberate in saying, look, it's not the nurses specifically, not the staff, it's the understaffing, which we're seeing in the first responder professions, and the
Yeah.
mismanagement of cities and counties and fire chiefs and police chiefs at the moment. So parallel that with the nursing world that you were seeing in these homes.
Yeah. So it's all about cutting costs. Well, okay. So in nursing homes, most of the money, 70% or more, comes from the government. It's mostly Medicaid for long-term care, and Medicare for the rehabilitation for the short-term care. So the companies that run nursing homes, that's where their money's coming from, and it's a fixed amount, right? It's not, we'll do more service and we'll get paid. It's a per diem amount that's fixed. So how do you maximize profit? Well, the only way you maximize profit in that kind of a financial environment is to reduce costs. What's your biggest cost in a nursing home? Your biggest cost in a nursing home is labor. So if you're going to maximize, if you're going to do optimize and maximize your profit, is you cut labor. Okay. And so labor means staffing. And so the more you cut staffing, the less hands-on care you have for nursing home residents. And let's face it, the reason they're in the nursing home in the first place is because they need 24/7 hands-on care. You cut back that hands-on care, you have delays in answering call bells. You have delays in providing sort of basic hygiene. You have delays in a lot of the residents cannot move about themselves, so they have to be helped out of bed, helped in put into a wheelchair maybe, or helped to the bathroom. You cut out the staffing to do all that, then you have people who are basically end up just laying in one place for most of the time, with no kind of mental, or emotional stimulation, and they develop illnesses. They become dehydrated. They become malnourished. If you don't have enough staff to help them eat, they become they develop pressure sores. They develop infections because you don't have enough staff to provide hygiene and sanitation and help them move around. And you get from there, you go into sepsis, and from sepsis you go to death. And I know it's very easy to say, well, they're old people and they're at the end of their life anyway, and they've already lived their lives. But one of the people that spoke in the docuseries says, it's not necessarily dying; it's how you die, and to be neglected and have pressure sores and be malnourished, not fed, and dehydrated. Those are all forms of torture, and none of us. I don't care how old we are and how long we've lived our lives, how well we lived our lives. None of us deserve to die while being tortured. Okay. And so that business model of understaffing is what leads to that kind of treatment. And it is what is really happening is in the large corporations and the private equity groups that are starting to take over nursing homes. And it's just not private equity as sort of the formal business model. It's a private equity model that is being adopted by corporations and individuals. They're not necessarily private equity per se, but they've got that model. The model is to take out as much money as fast as you can. And the way you do that and keep the flow of money coming from the government at the same level is to create what are called related entities. So a good many of the nursing homes that are in the private equity model, they have the building, the real estate is held by another company. They have other aspects of the business, like a management company that runs the accounts receivable, takes in the payments from the government, pays the bills. That's another separate entity, but all of these other entities are all owned by the same either corporate or individual person. And all they're doing is moving the money from the nursing home into these other entities. The rent that the real estate company charges is often inflated. The management company is charging a pretty hefty fee just to run the bills and to pay, issue checks to pay bills. Sometimes they own the physical therapy company. Sometimes they own the staffing company to bring in visiting nurses. But they're taking money out. I think there are some studies that have been done, 2 studies that have been done that show that 63% of the profits that nursing homes make are being funneled out. They call it tunneled out to related party entities. I mean, that's 63% of the profit. So what they show to the government is we're not making any money or we're losing money, and therefore you need to increase how much you pay us. But what's hidden underneath is the fact that they're pulling money out secretly into these related entities in order to if they're private equity, they won't need to do a return on investment to their private equity shareholders. Or if they're just greedy corporations or businessmen, they're just taking out the money for themselves. That business model is being allowed to go forward by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, an agency of the Health and Human Services Department, because of the lax oversight, the very weak reporting that they require, and the lack of enforcement. And again, so the same pattern, our government agency that's supposed to be the watchdog over that is kind of is complicit, is allowing it to happen. And it's all about making as much money as you can. And you will see the depersonalization of nursing home residents in corporate books and records, financial records. They're not called residents or they're not called people, they're called beds. Okay. So completely depersonalized. And just as people addicted to opioids are stigmatized and, just written off as addicts, well, these are just beds in a facility. They're not really people. That's, again, the corporate part of the corporate model.
I mean, you just see the same blueprint no matter what industry we're talking about. And I think, where it really kills me is when areas need funding, people say, oh, we don't have the money. There's not enough. Oh, you want to raise taxes? And it's not even about that. If you look at the nation as we sit here now, we are 70% overweight, of which 40+% is obese. So if you just simply actually valued the citizens and you put in programs like real food in schools and put PE programs back in and bolstered local farmers to grow clean food, you would turn that around, and then you'd have all of this money to start putting in, and then prisons and nursing homes and all these other places would not be as overcrowded as they are, and your first responders wouldn't be worked into the ground. But if you have this model where that doesn't matter, we're just servants to the machine, and you're just focused purely on profit, this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. And my profession, if we don't change, if we don't stop working our men and women into the ground while our chiefs go home at 5 every night and don't care, then there will be no one when you call 911 anymore. There will be no doctors and nurses left to staff these facilities if we keep treating them this way. So I don't know how we can get to the point of enough is enough. And I think storytelling is a big part of that. But I mean, I don't think it's too dramatic to say that we're getting close to that point now.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we document in the in No Country for Old People is what's called moral injury, and I'm sure in your profession that that's a real thing, right? You're told you can't do everything you feel like you need to do because you're not given enough resources and you're not given enough support to do it. And that's what's happening with our healthcare workers. I think not just in nursing homes, but across the board, is that they're people go into those professions, first responder, healthcare worker, they go into that out of a sense of wanting to help people, right? And when you're not able to do that the way it should be done, you have an injury. It's a moral injury. It affects you, right? You don't just walk away and say, "Oh, I did what I could do," and it has an impact on you emotionally and psychologically, and that's a real thing. And people are not going to they're going to leave because they cannot take the moral injury day in and day out. And that's kind of what's happening in nursing homes, in healthcare in general, with nurses in all kinds of different facilities and other caregivers. And it's what's happening with first responders. If you're not given the ability to do the job, you're there because you have a sense of duty and a sense of purpose. But if you are prevented from doing it the way it should be done, you're going to have some sort of an injury.
I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is if we feel so deeply when we lose someone, the inability to save, whether it's, lack of training, lack of resources, whatever the thing is, and that does affect us so deeply. Why do these people that make these decisions that hundreds of thousands of people die not have moral injury? And it goes back to my question, are they fit to even be in that position in the first place? Because as a servant, we feel it so deeply. I can't even comprehend being at the head of a tobacco company, knowing that 6 million, 6 or 8 million people around the world die annually from my product. And, it doesn't bother me.
That's hard to imagine, hard to fathom, right? It's hard to, there are people like that out there, but there are, and they shouldn't be. One of the things about the two cases that I did, both the Purdue case and the Abbott case, was that at least Health and Human Services Office of Counsel to the Inspector General has the ability to exclude people from basically Medicare, Medicaid, in essence, that excludes them from health care. So we had exclusions of the 3 top executives. They were no longer able to work in healthcare for a period of 12 years. And then we had an exclusion of the nursing home owner from Miami and the official from Ohio. I forgot how much she got excluded for, but he got excluded for like 50 years. So he was never going to be in the nursing home business again. And so, yeah, definitely had that sense. These guys they shouldn't be doing this stuff. They shouldn't be in this business. And there is a mechanism, an administrative mechanism, at least in healthcare, to do that. Again, it's getting the government, the agency, to want to actually act on with that authority, actually utilize that authority, but it's there. So again, it's like, there's things you can do, but even though you get knocked back and you're not able to do as much as you can, it's like, well, let's keep fighting. You got to keep fighting.
Absolutely. 100%. Well, I could talk to you for another 2 hours easily, but I know you've actually got to call Todd in a few minutes. So for people listening, where are the best places to find the documentary? And then if they want to reach out to you personally?
Yeah, it's the documentary is on Amazon. It's called No Country for Old People, a nursing home expose. It's a 3-part docuseries. I think it's also on Tubi. So if you don't have Amazon, you can go to Tubi and look up No Country for Old People. I'm on LinkedIn. I guess if you could, Rick Mountcastle at LinkedIn. I haven't checked it lately. Also on Facebook. So there are 2 places you can track me down at. So yeah, happy to connect with anyone that wants to help move things forward.
Well, I want to thank you so much. I mean, firstly, obviously, for what you have actually done for so many people. I mean, especially nationally with the Purdue case. I don't think people would ever really comprehend the ripple effect of the lives saved, with what you and your team did, and obviously all the voices of that community too that stood up. And then now with the nursing home side as well. So not only that, though, I just want to thank you for being, one of the beacons of light, because I completely believe that if we just have hope and we believe that every single one of us can be part of this fight, and as you said, whatever your skill set is, I never thought that talking into a microphone would be something that I would do, or writing books, but here we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, just being part of that movement, saying, just rolling up your sleeves and saying enough is enough. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time today and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Yeah, James, thank you for having me. And it was, I enjoyed it. And greetings to all your listeners.